In this session, we're going to unpack writing for understanding as part of the Bring Learning Alive TCI strategies. The Writing for Understanding strategy taps into students' multiple abilities so that all learners have something memorable to write about. Purposeful writing assignments motivate students to write with style and meaning. There's some important things we need to understand about writing for understanding before we begin. First of all, as the title implies, we're not simply assessing students' writing here, but we want students to come to understand the key concepts through the writing process so that writing actually helps students to learn and clarify their thinking as they write. Secondly, students must have experiences to write about. And so what you'll find as we unpack the Writing for Understanding strategy is that you will see a lot of the experiences and the activities look like many other TCI strategies. They might be doing things like a gallery walk that you would see in a social studies skill builder strategy. Or they might be analyzing visuals like you would see in the visual discovery strategy. They may even be doing activities, something like you would see in an experiential exercise. But the key here is we're giving students that experience, and then we're having them process that experience through writing. Let's look now at some of the general guidelines for writing for understanding. First, we need to design writing tasks to help your students learn key concepts. Again, we start here with the concept rather than the strategy. What do we want students to know and be able to do? Concept-based learning is so important in social studies. And this is really the aim of all of these strategies that TCI provides is how do we provide ways for students to really come to understand the key concepts that we want them to know. So we have to define those concepts first, and then we have to determine what kinds of writing tasks will help students come to understand those concepts. Again, it's writing for understanding. And there are a variety of types of writing. We'll look at conventional writing tasks like 5-paragraph essays, but there are alternatives as well. They can be newspaper articles or editorials or blog posts, or again, in today's digital world, maybe it's a script for a podcast, or maybe it's a tweet that we want students to write, or a Twitter thread, or other kind of social media post. But the key is here to design those writing tasks around the learning concepts. Second, we need to give students rich experiences to write about. Again, it might be a gallery walk, it might be an activity that they participate in, it might be visuals that they're analyzing, but they need to have those experiences and to process those experiences as they write. Third, have students record their ideas, thoughts, and feelings in pre-writing activities. What is most often used here is a graphic organizer, but it can be just brainstorming on the paper, getting their ideas out as they conduct the activities. Fourth, providing students with those authentic writing assignments. So once they've done the activity, we've already designed that writing task before we've gone into this. And again, I mentioned a variety of different kinds of writing tasks that can be authentic. We provide students with the writing assignment. And fifth, we guide students through the writing process. And this is really important. With all of TCI's strategies, it's not assumed that students are simply going to be able to do all of these strategies independently, these activities independently, without support. Of course, many of the activities are designed to be cooperative activities. They'll have help from other students, but they will also have modeling and guided practice from the teacher. And there's a big difference between simply assigning writing and grading writing and guiding students through the writing process. And that's what's important. So we already mentioned that pre-writing that's part of this writing process, but also checking as students go. You can also incorporate peer review into this writing process. Let's look now at some examples of writing for understanding that come from the various TCI programs. So from the History Alive 7th grade program, you take a walking tour of Athens during its golden age in the 5th century BCE, and then they write a speech about why Athens is a great city. So again, they have the experience of the walking tour where they're going to look at images, and then there's the authentic writing task, writing a speech about why Athens is a great city. From the United States through industrialism in grade 8, they're going to visit an art exhibit, a ball, and a literary gathering to explore what it meant to be an American in the early 1800s. Then they'll write a chapter of a book by Alexis de Tocqueville describing what it means to be an American in the early 1800s. And here again, they've had that multiple means of representation and engagement. They've looked at an art exhibit, a ball, a literary gathering. So they've tapped into all of those multiple intelligences before they start writing this book chapter. From our 9th grade World Connections program, students play the role of reporters using social media to gather information about historical events in the Middle East and write a story, cover the 5 W's and the 1 H of journalism: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Again, there's that authentic writing task. Let's look at some more high school examples. From Pursuing American Ideals, students take a tour of the US and meet ordinary Americans who lived during the Great Depression. They take notes in their scrapbooks, and they use them to write letters to Eleanor Roosevelt describing their travels. From Government Alive, students review the criminal case of a death row inmate and write an amicus brief for his claim that his constitutional rights were denied. So there's a great authentic experience that students might one day do in their career as an attorney. From our Custom Global Issues program, students assume the role of a proponent and critic of globalization, participate in a series of debates, and write blogs evaluating whether the benefits of globalization outweigh the costs. So again, in all of these, you can see just from these short descriptions that there's an experience that's paired with a writing task. And by no means are these the only kinds of writing tasks. You will, as a teacher, obviously have your own kinds of writing tasks that you want to incorporate and your own kinds of rich experiences. And when you pair those two together, you've created a writing for understanding. So how do you find those writing for understandings in your program? With every TCI program, it is designed to be a turnkey approach. We're not simply giving you the strategies and saying, go forth and teach. We're providing you with model lessons. And so when you locate those, it depends on which program you're in. If you have one of our custom programs in grade 6, 7, or high school global issues, they use the older layout in which you'll be able to see this right from the content page. You'll see over here, just make sure you have teaching strategy checked. And for each of the lessons where it has the description, you'll see the teaching strategy highlighted here, writing for understanding. If you have one of the TCI national programs, which is grade 8, 9, 10, and 11, so up through Government Alive, they've changed the layout of this, so you have to dig in a little further to the lesson itself and the lesson overview. And this is in that teacher planning section, not visible to students. You'll see the activity described here, and it will say this is a writing for understanding activity. Again, in TCI lessons, they always provide you with not just a description, but a step-by-step tutorial on how to do this. But we want you to be able to locate them first and connect them with this professional development experience as well. So let's take a look at an example from the United States through industrialism, our grade 8 program. In this writing for understanding, students work in pairs to match quotations and placards, then write an essay describing how African Americans faced slavery in the mid-1800s. So again, you see we've done two things here. We've provided students with a rich experience in which they're going to look at quotations and placards. That's TCI's term for visuals. And these placards are provided both in the digital program and in hard copy. So students will match those two in this rich experience. They'll write about them, and then they will draft an essay. So let's take a look inside of that program. Again, every TCI lesson has an activity slide presentation, and this includes the entire presentation. So it's not just the activity portion, but the preview and the processing as well. So in this case, it also tells me the materials I need. So here I have the materials, the interactive student notebook, the placards that I'm going to need to analyze, and those quotations that I'm going to match them with, as well as some perspective on slavery writing task handout. So I can open these up as the PDF files. We dig in here are the placards A through H. Now, again, these are provided digitally. You can print them out from the program, but you also receive hard copies of these placards. In any program where it says placard here, you'll be provided with cardstock hard copies of these to post around your room. In this case, you would do this as a gallery walk type activity. So moving forward in the presentation, again, with some preparation guidance here, you'll consider how you'll set up your class. This Writing for Understanding, it says, is a 150 to 200 minutes. So you're talking about close to a week's worth of activity here. This is not a one-day lesson. Now, as you dig in here, you'll notice there is an extensive preview assignment involved in this. So we're looking at the core strategy, the Writing for Understanding, which is going to include the activity and the writing. And in this case, really, the Writing for Understanding substitutes as the processing. But again, I'm going to zip through this pretty quickly here. We're not going to really take the time to look at the preview. But in your class, you would definitely want to do the preview. And in this case, the vocab is front-loaded as well. Also, of course, this is intertwined with the student textbook. And we'll go through the introduction. Now we get to the core activity, the Writing for Understanding. And in this activity, you'll work in pairs to match quotations and placards describing how African Americans faced slavery in the mid-1800s. So we have those placards. They're going to be around the room in 8 stations. We have the quotations, and students are going to match them up. So what students do is they work in pairs. They will grab a quotation from a pile and they will match it with one of the placards. They ask themselves, what is the subject of this quotation? Find the section of the reading notes that addresses this topic and complete that section. So that looks like this because this is the 8th grade program. The middle school programs provide what we used to call the Black Line Masters. That is the fillable files that students can do. Or of course, if they're in the digital program, they also do this online in their student text. So all of this is interconnected. Have your teacher check your work. Again, just like a social studies skill builder, if you've utilized that strategy, that modeling and that guided practice, part of that is having the teacher check students' work along the way. Return their quotation, get another one, start again with step 1 until they've matched all of the placards. And then you can use this to do a little bit of checking for understanding along the way to be sure students have matched them up. Because the really critical part of this is not for students to necessarily match the placards. I think you'll find it's not terribly complicated in this activity to do that. But the critical aspect is that they're doing the analysis work that comes inside of the notebook. So when you see this inside of the notebook, this is the pre-writing. This is the analysis and the pre-writing that students are going to do before they get to the actual writing task. So when they've done that, now we can see from handout B, which we can also access in our materials section, you can see what the task is. Understanding perspectives on slavery. Consider the perspective of an enslaved person living in the mid-1800s. Write an essay that explains what life was like for an enslaved person in the mid-1800s. Your essay should describe the daily life of an enslaved person and explain why and how enslaved people might resist slavery. So this is a more conventional 5-paragraph essay style. Again, you could make this more creative. I think some earlier versions of this lesson may have had students write as a journal, but that's one of those where I think you want to think about whether that's the kind of task you want students to do. Do you really want to place them in that situation of being someone who's enslaved and oppressed in this way? Or does it simply make more sense in this situation for us to write a more conventional essay as a historian would, rather than to do this in first person? I think that's just a piece to consider with any TCI activity and lesson. When do you want students in first person, and when is it really better to simply look at this as a more conventional historical essay? So that's what this particular writing for understanding looks like. Again, that's just to show you, you don't really get the full experience here in this video session, but that's the idea behind giving students that rich experience, in this case, a gallery walk. And here again, the writing would substitute as the processing task as well. One important point that I want to make here before we leave this slide is to reiterate that idea of giving students the opportunity for peer feedback. And I know peer feedback is sometimes challenging because you say, well, what do their peers know, right? I mean, that's where you again come into play. You provide students, maybe working in groups of 4, you provide them with some direction on what to review. So if students are working in groups of 3 or 4, you might ask them to peer review one, and in the first round of that peer review, they might look at, does this have a strong thesis statement? And you guide them through, what does a good thesis statement look like? Maybe in the second round, they might trade their writing tasks again, their written responses with another student, and this time you might look at, do they have good evidence, right? Did they provide good reasons? Again, you can guide students through any aspect of effective writing processes from, do they have good transitions in their writing? It's not just assessing the historical understanding, but their writing skills as well. Do they have a strong introduction? Do they have something that catches the eye of the reader? The possibilities here are endless, but if you give students those very specific directives on what they're looking for in peer review, that can be part of the writing process. Again, we're not just assigning writing, we are providing students with opportunities to learn through writing, and we're guiding them through the writing process. I know, I understand, and I hear you that teaching writing is sometimes challenging, right? And that, most students, I think even most adults probably are not just naturally good writers. It takes a lot of work. And the one thing I always say is, it's a good thing that our students don't know how to do everything that we ask them to do right away, because they wouldn't need us as teachers, right? If learning social studies was simply a matter of, clicking on screens, reading them, and answering multiple choice questions, I'm not sure what the role of the teacher would be. But if learning social studies involves this writing process that students aren't going to know intuitively and may have found challenging even through their experiences in schools, that's where we come in as the teacher, and we help to facilitate that. It's not just assign and grade, but it's guide. It's helping students even peer review and help them learn through that process. So that's just one example, kind of an in-depth look at a writing for understanding task. As you become more comfortable with the writing for understanding strategy, you will undoubtedly find ways to adapt it and make it work for you. Now, here's one way you might adapt the writing for understanding strategy, and this is outside of the TCI approach, but it's a tried and true approach called the RAFT adaptation. So RAFT stands for role, audience, format, and topic. You can design RAFTs as a teacher, or you can also have students design their own RAFT activity, or you can do some combination thereof. You might provide the role and the audience, and the students design the format, for example. Or you might provide the topic, and students design the role, audience, and format. So I've provided you with 4 examples here. Suppose you're an American farmer in the 1940s. Your audience is newspaper readers, and you're writing an op-ed. Again, here's that authentic writing task that we looked at throughout Writing for Understanding. And your topic is to continue the Brasario program allowing Mexican farm workers. You might be an African-American migrant to a northern city in the 1920s, and your audience is a local NAACP chapter. You're going to give a speech, and the topic is support needed for new city residents. Maybe your role is women on the home front during World War II, and you're writing to a World War II soldier and her family, and you're writing in the format of a letter, and the topic is how the war is affecting the home front. So these are just a few examples of RAFTs. Again, as you've taught writing before, you probably have incorporated many of these formats, and you may have even incorporated many of these roles and topics as well. This is just one way to put it together, and I think one way that it can work with Writing for Understanding. So, of course, what will be important before you get to the RAFT task is, what are those rich experiences? What are the multiple means of representation? Have students looked at visuals? Have they looked at video? Have they had an experience, an experiential exercise? Have they done a gallery walk? If they've analyzed other primary sources. And all of that goes into creating this rich experience. And then you can use the RAFT adaptation as one way to promote authentic writing tasks. So as we prepare to wrap up, let's take a look again at our Writing for Understanding guidelines. Again, we want to design writing tasks to help students learn key concepts. We want to provide them with those rich experiences to write about. Have students record their ideas, thoughts, and feelings in pre-writing activities. If you're using a TCI lesson, those are generally built into that interactive student notebook. Provide students with authentic writing assignments, and then guide students through the writing process. As with all TCI programs, it is designed as a turnkey program. TCI provides you with those model lessons and all of the resources you need to teach the lesson. But we believe it's still important to understand the underlying strategies, to understand what goes into building a Writing for Understanding. Because TCI can design a lesson, but it's up to you as the classroom teacher to implement it. And you're going to find ways to implement it that works for you and works for your students. And you will probably add to and adapt these general guidelines as you go. And the more comfortable you become with incorporating Writing for Understanding, you may find that you have a whole different set of guidelines that you use, or a whole different set of tips that you could provide for your colleagues and how you've guided students through that writing process. But that really is the critical aspect, is just to begin here and begin to spark in your mind some thought about how Writing for Understanding can work in your classroom.